So, Mark Harmon, welcome, and you are the first repeat guest on this show, and it's a tremendous honor to have you back on again. And I know that you've got probably 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 more shows of material to entertain us with. So, thanks for being here.
Yeah, no, not a problem at all.
Yeah. So I just want to think back to, 1,000 years ago at some place around here in Minnesota, and at some winter's day, and someone's out on a lake somewhere, and they're fishing in the wintertime. The basic idea is you drill a hole or cause a hole to be made in the ice, and you see what you can catch, right?
I would think that they were probably really hungry.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certainly been a lot of improvements since then, even, 20 years ago.
Do you know the history of it at all? Like, were people actually ice fishing that long ago?
Oh, I would think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I don't know that history.
Yeah.
There's things that I've been adjacent to that I would know a lot more history to, like
Yeah.
the evolution of the wheelhouse or something like that. But, I imagine that, from watching stuff like those Alaskan outdoors TV shows, you see them go out with a spud bar or a big long chisel, and then they pound through the ice, and then they get it open. I've seen people do stuff on videos where they might agitate the top of the water and all the smelt comes out or what have you. Mm-hmm. None of that I'm an expert in. None of that I have any experience in. My hunch is that probably the fishing experience was a lot like watching wildlife. It's like the Fishhook River here. It doesn't really freeze. I've seen it close up at 10 degrees before, but wide open at minus 30.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard. So, well, that's where the birds gather, right?
Sure.
And, I think that a lot of fishermen know that if you see a lot of birds, there's probably some kind of chum or something on top of the water, which brings in other things. And so the circle of life continues in that.
Yeah.
Not to say that that's how that works, but my guess is 1 or 2 people fell through the ice right away on a river, and they said, hey, let's figure out how to do this where we're not so close to the edge of the ice, or create something that's a little bit more secure.
But they could see the fish were there, and they were there to be had.
If something's eating. There's fish to be had for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know. I'm not an expert, but I would rationalize that that's how it would work. If I was in a survival situation, I would probably go to a river before I would go to...
Okay. Would you? Yeah.
I think so. I mean, you have more availability of oxygen, right? To get into the water system. It's moving. If water is moving, it's probably passing over things that is going to stir up different hatches.
Yeah.
I don't know. If I'm in a survival situation, I think I'd rather be in that warmer climate trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Or find a berry
too. But at the same time, though, if you think about it, if you're in a survival situation, the majority of the population would be moving south to get out of the harsh winters, right?
There's migration patterns, right? Where people will come south. Animals migrate. Most everything does migrate. But I remember something back on social studies, I think, that was talking about dogs and human beings being the most adaptable species on Earth, right? Yep. And so we can handle and adapt to those harsher type of environments. And so, when the adaptations came of maybe using animal skins or fire and other things like that, it allows you to have to move less. Your migration pattern. Clearly, our migration patterns, since we live here in Park Rapids, are lesser.
Yeah.
Right? Obviously people like to vacation and there's snowbirds and, we can insert clauses of differentiation here, but the reality is, we can adapt and survive just fine. It really helps to have a furnace.
So in that apocalyptic scenario, we could stay right here and have all the fish to ourselves, as provided that we knew how to ice fish, right?
Yeah, I think that there's or you know how to store your catch from the summer. Either way, but in this case, no.
We need to know how to ice fish.
We
Mark.
need to know how to ice fish.
So,
okay.
Well, and that's what brings us here today.
Agreed.
So how popular is ice fishing in let's just say this state?
Well, it's certainly more popular here than Florida, where there is no ice, right? So there is naturally that. Yeah. Minnesota has all the components to be an extremely popular sport. We have a lot of water, right? Yeah. A lot of non-moving water.
Right.
So, when you have that hard water experience, it's certainly very popular. I think that years ago, and probably even true today, when you compare the price of a fish house to a boat, the cost of entry is certainly a lot less with ice fishing. Unlike if you had a rod and reel, you are probably limited to a shoreline or a fishing pier in the summertime. In the wintertime, if you had a spud bar at a minimum and you had a rod and reel, you could access much greater depths of fish, right? And so then that does change. And so I think that, in some circles, ice fishing is kind of a lowbrow sport, right? And I think that over time, things have changed. There wouldn't be hard for somebody to justify a $600 fly fishing rod, but to spend over $25 for a ice fishing rod, you got to be kidding me. So there's that value placement that comes into things, and from your G. Loomis's or your St. Croix or Shimano rods and stuff for summer fishing, it's not really hard to get over $100 or $200 pretty quick, or way more. And that ice fishing price point to get into multi-$100, I don't think there's too much out there unless it's completely customized and hand painted, which would be novelty. And we can find any price tag on novelty stuff anywhere. And the reels and the hardware have changed a lot as well too. And so it is a limited market. It's regional, clearly by the nature of it being ice. My ice fishing experiences, I've been to Maine, I've ice fished in New Hampshire. I certainly know people have ice fished in New York. I haven't. Vermont, I would say as well. But Minnesota is dead center. It's kind of center mass. North Dakota, South Dakota, certainly there's a whole different genre of ice fishing.
They have the cold weather, but they don't have the lakes, right?
Well, they do. Lake Sakakawea is a significant lake. I laid this over at one time, the size of Lake Sakakawea.
Where is that?
It goes all the way from Ottoman, all the way across. Put it this way: if you it's in North Dakota, right between Minot and Bismarck, it's right in the center. If you laid that lake, which is nothing more than a frozen or a solid reservoir of the Missouri River, if you laid that over Minnesota, it would overlap Fargo all the way to Park Rapids. But here in Minnesota, we're like, what is that again?
It's a big lake.
It's a huge lake. It's a huge lake, and it has, and it's in a river system. So in a river system, you have a fighting chance of catching anything, right? A lake, you're kind of limited to the species and whatever is in there as well, and then you just go target. And there's people who, like Devil's Lake is another big place out in North Dakota. So there are places in North Dakota that have major destinations that can hold a tremendous amount of people. And, there's lodges that are set up that are out there that are open nowadays, around here. So there's other considerations in ice fishing, too, when it comes to access. You get to Lake of the Woods, you get to Red Lake. There's resorts that have their own fish houses. They have plow trucks. They can get you out of there because there is the compromise, of mobility. How can you get to certain stuff, right? And now is when you start to raise the level of entry cost, right? If you get into a four-wheeler and you put tracks on it, you're talking a lot of money. And then you go to a side-by-side because you prefer a cab, whole lot of money. You get into a fish house and now you want to move all this stuff. There's a truck, and your spend in ice fishing is still less than other sports when it comes to fishing, but it is gaining ground. And it just kind of depends on the year. And it can be a very long season or it can be a relatively short season.
Do you think that, and I don't know if you've seen statistics on this or not, but do you think there are more people who participate in fishing during the winter months than there are in the summer months?
I've seen the statistics, and no, summer fishing is far, 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 far greater.
Okay.
You look at all the resorts and how many people they hold. None of them are open in the summertime.
Okay. Or the wintertime.
Yeah, right. Yeah. There's ways to see it, but I've seen the statistics. It's nowhere close. But the people who are here, that's what they talk about, right? Sure. That's the hubbub of the area, So, it's different. But no, it's not even close.
And this is also a question that's going to call for sort of a generalization, but is it easier to catch fish in the winter than it is in the summer?
Well, I think it is. Typically you have fish that will school up and then hang out into certain areas. From a panfish standpoint, from a as pumpkin seeds and bluegills and that kind of stuff to your crappies, they have a tendency to go into the basins of the lake and kind of stay there. Sometimes they'll go out into the vegetation. But
basins mean the deepest
parts. Yeah, exactly. And that's and I'll talk about crappie here in a little bit of fishing. That's probably what I spend more time fishing than anything else.
Yeah.
And then your walleye, they have a tendency to get into where they like to go. And oftentimes the breaks and the shelves, and then you go up to Red Lake and it's a completely different ball game because that's a big giant basin. And if you happen to be on the school, you're going to fish for hours, or you're going to sit there and not do much of anything.
Yeah.
And you never know what time that comes in. You go up to Lake of the Woods, it's a whole different atmosphere where basically you have no business being out on ice at night because nothing's biting anyway.
Yeah.
And it's a day bite. So that's another thing too, is that different lakes have different things. But backing up here, I want to kind of open up when we talk about ice fishing. That ice safety is probably one of the most important things to talk about.
Yeah.
Watching a lake freeze gives you a great knowledge of how and what that lake is doing. I've watched fish hook freeze many times, and you can see the shallow end of it, and then there's a very caramelized kind of ripple that often happens about a half mile out from the south shore, and that's usually where the current's coming, which you never see or feel, but it does exist where it'll come over from the Portage River to go out to the fish hook access over there by Dean Park. And that usually takes place, that current usually flows right at the breaks, and the breaks are out about the 28-foot break is, you see, if you go out on the access, public access, the main one, they're on the south end of fish hook, there's a 13-foot hole that exists out there, and on that 13-foot hole you'll see this fishing village. And why people usually go there too is because people plow, so you have access to get out there, and so that oftentimes that's what it is, right? But when you go beyond that, point out to that shelf where it goes to 28 feet, you might be on 16, 17 inches of ice here. There may be 6 there. Because it froze at different times. It may only freeze out to a certain point.
Why does that happen? How does that happen?
Well, it could be that the ice formed maybe an inch over one night, and then the wind kicked up. And so the ice continues to grow because the water is still, right? But if there's kinetics into your ice out here, whether wind or current, it's not going to freeze. Kind of like the Fish Hook River example that I was talking about earlier. Sometimes it's by golly or by gosh, and so, but for the most part, usually wind is an indicator of why something didn't freeze. If it's really windy and it keeps moving, you could have a drink or something like that at 0 degrees, as long as you continue to turn it, and it's never going to freeze up. As soon as you stop, and all the energy stops, and the enthalpy is going to take over the entropy, and you're going to have ice, right? And it's going to crystallize. So that has a lot to do with it. So knowing how a lake freezes is really important. If you're unfamiliar with a lake, you never want to be the first one out on it. There is a few different lakes that I've been on before by myself. I've often second thought why I was out there. There's a lake just north of Park Rapids, a little ways, called Lake LaSalle. It is the deepest natural lake inland in Minnesota, other than the Mine Lakes or Lake Superior, right? And I went out there a couple of Januaries ago, and I couldn't quite tell if it was heat waves or if it was open water. Turns out it was open water. Well, I'm like, in
January?
Oh yeah, in January, and so it was a milder January, but still. So I took my auger, walked out a little bit, and I drilled down and had about 9 inches of ice. I'm like, all right. So I kept going out a little bit further, cautious, drilled down, had about 9 inches of ice. I kept going, 8 inches of ice, 7 inches of ice. And they say you can walk on 2 to 3 inches. That's not my comfort zone, but anybody else can go do that. And I was on 4 inches of ice, and all of a sudden I felt everything just go. I'm like, I am not doing this at all anymore. And I turned around and I walked back. It spooked me.
That technique that you're talking about, is that sort of like the recommended way to determine ice safety? And then how far do you walk out before you take your next like sounding or measurement?
I think it really depends on the time. You know, again, your lake knowledge. You know, I mean, if you see tire trucks and pickup trucks and everything else out there, you may want to stick to where those tire tracks are. Right? You know, I mean, if that truck made it through, you're probably going to make it through on foot.
Sure.
Right? Especially if you can see the trucks out there. If you don't see anybody on that lake and you see all the tire tracks pointing behind you, this isn't a good time to try it out.
Yeah.
Right? But, you know, I think for me, in my comfort zone, and my comfort zone should not be your comfort zone or anybody else's comfort zone.
Everybody's got to have their own, right?
Right. Your own risk tolerance. You know, I feel that I'm a capable swimmer, but I also know I have probably 60 pounds of gear on me. However, I also have a floating suit on, you know, so there's some considerations. You know, but usually I'm going to probably walk about 10 yards and drill another hole until I feel more comfortable. And then you get to a point where you've been out there long enough that you're like, okay, if I'm hitting 14 inches and I'm a quarter mile off the ice and there's a consistency to the bottom, then we're good. I use another app too called Navionics. You know, it's not a plug or anything like that, but I use that, and I can walk around and see the depth and kind of what the charts are. So if I were to get to a place where there's a sudden break or something like that, then you'd be concerned. I'm probably going to drill again.
Because the deeper the water, the thinner the ice kind of idea, or
sometimes. Yeah. I mean, that's not always true. Sometimes it could be the biggest part of the basin. You know, that kind of stuff. And, you know, there's variables. You know, I mean, I've known people who have had ATV accidents who have gone through the ice, and their logic was, well, I drove my four-wheeler on that date the year before. I didn't think it'd be a problem.
Right.
Well, you can't go by the calendar. You need to go by what your conditions are. So from an ice safety standpoint, if you're a novice ice fisherman, I wouldn't venture going out by yourself. I would go with somebody else, so at least you have... You know, the Boy Scout handbook would say grab a ladder if somebody falls through. Of course, there's lots of ladders available in the middle of a lake, right? You know, but you know, if you happen to go through, you know, lay out flat, you know, spread out your surface area, and don't panic. Often they say that, you know, you would be more inclined to go to the spot of the hole that you just fell through in, but that would be where the thinner ice is. And sometimes they say to swim away from that and go to the thicker ice. So, you know, just the key is being calm. You know, because you start breaking and wailing around best you can. I mean, you know, it's mind over matter a lot of time. Cold water can do really big damage to people. You know, it can start shutting down organs. Your body will protect itself. So, you know, I'm not saying don't ice fish. But, you know, I mean, there's some rules of thumb. Like maybe you don't want to go out on ice until after Christmas, and that's good measure. Maybe, you know, I've told people before, I'll drive on the ice. I'm not afraid to drive on the ice, but I definitely will not be the first pickup truck. I might be the third, but I won't be the first one. You know, that's just general. But I would always be cautious with ice, and you know, the buddy system is always a good way to go. And you know, if you're familiar with that ice and you're familiar with those conditions, don't take them for granted. Still take precautions. Watch for certain things, like a fresh spear hole might be out there in the middle of the lake. And maybe that hasn't frozen as thick as everything else. You know?
and you, I mean, your family and you know, you learned a lesson about the spear holes firsthand.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know, the person who cut the spear hole, I mean, I know that they came up to me afterwards and were like, "That was my spear hole. I apologize. It wasn't your fault." You know, I had a situation basically where I had a 4-year-old, 7-year-old, and a 9-year-old that were out on the ice, and the 4-year-old went through the ice. The 7 and 9-year-old happened to react, see that, and go save her. Thank goodness, because I was inside of a fish house at the time, running an auger, and I couldn't hear anything outside. You know, we're just prepping the house for the day. I assure you, I talked to my kids about ice safety. I assure you, I told them stay away from that branch that was on top of the ice. Oftentimes,
that's how they mark the spear hole, right?
There's no law that says to do this, but there is a tradition, which I think is a healthy tradition, that you might have, you know, a fir branch or something like that that's going to indicate, hey, you know, there might be some danger over here. I mean, use the natural stuff. At least, you know, I mean, like plastic tape and stuff like that. That's not very economic. You know, it's not very eco-friendly. You know, a branch can fall. You know, that kind of stuff. So, I mean, you can be as knowledgeable and you can be as experienced and you can preach safety as much as you want to, and things can still go bad.
Yeah.
So that henceforth the buddy system or having a second set of eyes, I think, is never a bad idea.
Yeah.
Not to mention, I mean, if you're cold and have hypothermia, your body doesn't necessarily recognize all those signals right away. So there's lots of good reason to fish with the buddy. Not to mention, it's just good to fish with somebody
and
else.
it's fun. Yeah. Is there any other, like, I know some people carry like those ice picks and stuff in their jacket and all that. And
yep, I carry picks.
And those picks are to basically gain leverage when you're trying to pull yourself out of the ice.
Yeah, wet ice is extremely slippery.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And so I've read something that says, well, just sit there calmly and allow your arms to freeze into the ice. Like, oh, yeah. If you have the presence of mind to do that and give it time, fine. Give me an ice pick.
Yeah.
Chick, and, pull yourself out. So there's a lot of tips. And
that's basically how you have to kind of do it. It's almost like getting out of a pool in a sense, right?
Yeah, in a sense. Yeah. I mean, and you want to stay on your belly and, and you want to keep your legs low and spread out as much as you can. It's all about your weight disbursement.
Yeah.
But there is a strength element, and it's easy for anybody to overestimate how strong they might be, especially in a situation of shock. So anyway, I could spend all this time talking about ice safety, but read up on that. The DNR has a lot of stuff posted on that.
And don't take anything that we're saying as being correct. Right. Always make sure to do your own research on every lake, and what you're comfortable with is what you're comfortable with.
Sure, right.
I mean, that's all there really is to say about that. So,
for sure.
All right, so now that we've gotten up the guts to go ice fishing, and just take the example of sort of a novice person who wanted to try. Let's say they just bought a lake home, they've never gone ice fishing before, and they just wanted to try it and see what it was like. What's the sort of like the very basic equipment that they would need, and how would they get that set up?
Yeah, that's going to be extremely species orientated.
Okay.
I mean, you wouldn't take a pistol to go deer hunting. Certainly there's people who would. But you got to have the right tool for the right job. And we can make golf analogies for that, or screwdriver versus hammer, that kind of stuff. But, I mean, I think you need to understand, most lakes kind of have an identity of what they're known for. If it's a walleye lake, if it's a panfish lake, if it's this kind of lake, and I think you need to know yourself as well. Myself, I have a tendency to be a little bit more type A. To wait for 2 hours for a walleye isn't my favorite thing to do, right? I'm oftentimes going out for a little bit of time now, and I've got about a 45-minute or an hour window where I can fish. It makes me feel satisfied that I did that. I'm probably not going to go after something that's going to take a whole lot of time to go catch, which is usually why I'm targeting crappie.
Right.
Panfish are fine too. You can usually readily catch panfish. So understanding and knowing what species you want to go with is going to drive your equipment. It's going to drive your lures. It's going to drive how you target it, and probably even to some level, what equipment you're going to surround yourself with. Are you going to bring out like a little ice tent and a shelter and a little furnace? Do you need to go that far? What time of year are you fishing? So let's just kind of, start with identifying a few different things. I would say that if you want to have a high success rate in fishing, panfish is usually a good place to start.
Super important to have that first initial success when you're starting something new like that, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. And usually panfish or crappie is going to have a high success rate.
Okay.
There's a lake in particular north of Park Rapids, and I wouldn't promise this all the time, but Mantrap Lake is known for having a lot of crappie that you can go out there and catch readily. I used to take my kids out there, and between the three of us, or the four of us, I guess, we could catch 125 fish. And what's interesting about Mantrap is you didn't have to wait till sunset to catch them. You could catch them frequently all day long. High success ratio. The numbers, though, in size are really small. So you're catching fish and you're turning it over. They used to have a slot on it where you could only keep 5 fish over 10 inches.
Okay.
And you would catch one 10-inch fish. Out of all 125.
You couldn't catch any you couldn't keep any smaller fish.
No, because they're trying to increase the size.
Sure,
they're trying different experiments and pulling different levers. And now I think you can just catch 5, and I think the size is off. But always check your local limits and stuff. But for us, it was fun. We would set up tip-ups, which I didn't bring any of those today, but we'd set up tip-ups, and we put down sucker minnows. And so as an ice fisherman in Minnesota, you can fish 2 lines.
2 lines, yep.
So we would jig with 1 line, we'd put up tip-ups, and we would just kind of wait till a flag popped up and then have the kids kind of hook and pull up a northern. So if that northern kind of came through...
Because the tip-up's for the northern, right?
Yeah, for sure. Typically. I mean, if you're lucky enough to catch a muskie, that's a great day.
Yeah.
I have not been that lucky. There's people who use tip-ups for other species as well.
Sure.
Typically in our family, we're using that for a northern or something like that. We've caught bass on them. We've caught accidental other fish. I've done tip-ups in other states for like lake trout, and that's always a scream. Especially when you're doing old man in the sea, hand over hand, lining in a fish. That's kind of fun.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we would set up, we would go after a high success rate, especially with kids. You got to have some kind of repetition and stuff like that. So let's just say that we're going to go out and we're going to, look at that. We need to start selecting equipment. We need to start figuring out what we want. So maybe for this example, we could talk about different ice fishing rods. Generally speaking, most people are probably going to get initially a rod and reel that will have some kind of form of a spin cast reel, something that we'd be very familiar with.
That's what you're showing there?
Yep. So this is a spin cast reel, and basically you just open it up, let her fall, okay? And away she goes. Now, I personally don't use... this is my son's. So we can talk about a spin cast reel, and then we have these other fishing poles, or fishing rods, that have more of an inline situation. So the line's going to come off more on a straight line, okay, where that's going to come off of a coil then go down. Okay, there's reasons for that and why I do those things. So you need to figure out what your rod is per species. You take something like this guy here. This rod here has a lot, it's got a lot of backbone all the way through here, and so it's kind of got a medium action. They talk about medium, fast, and slow action rods and reels. Fast action would be something very, very stiff. Or if I pull down here, it's going to take the whole rod. This is a little bit more play. There's tons of play out here.
And what would be the reason for having the different actions?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So it depends on how you load up. If you're trout fishing, I don't think I brought any of my trout rods. This is a walleye rod. So the backbone, it's a lot stiffer out in here, okay? So typically, if I'm fishing a walleye, this is actually more of my walleye rig. If I'm fishing a walleye, there's my button. It's been a while since I use this. But if I'm fishing a walleye, I'll just have this guy here, and the little bit more backbone gives me a little bit more snap to pull it up and set the hook.
Okay.
A trout, I use an even faster action rod, something that's even harder. Trout, rainbow trout in particular, have very hard mouths. And to set the hook is tricky, and they're very sight sensitive as well. Remember, they're bug eaters, right?
Yeah.
So they're very sight sensitive, and so I don't use a treble hook so often. I'll just use a single hook. Well, if you don't have that single hook set right the first time and don't have it pulled in deep, he'll spit that in a second. And I don't know how they spit it so well, but they do. So anyway, that's more of a fast action rod and reel here. This one here, I'm guessing, is probably a medium action, more of a dual.
Okay.
So when you get into this,
so that'd be like a versatile that you could use for a lot of different species, or
sure, absolutely. Yeah. And we have like a little tiny jig on here, which is a little tungsten jig, probably a little 2 ounce. I use tungsten jigs typically because they have a lot of density to them, so they sink like that.
Yeah.
And then when we get down. One thing that I got away from using spin cast rod and reels, what's nice is that you can get a lot of line on here. But if you look at all this line, see how much twist is in there?
That's called memory, right?
Yep, that's correct. And so when you have memory, where that translates into motion or movement on your fishing lure as well. So if it's all spun up in there, it's not so much spinning right here where we're at now, but if I let all this line twist out there, what's going to happen is that fishing line or that fishing lure in your presentation is going to sit there and spin and spin and spin. And your fish are just going to sit there and look at it.
Yeah.
And if you've ever been sitting off a dock, you can learn a lot by visually watching a fish's response to a lure, whether you're just watching panfish off of a dock, or maybe if you're watching it on an underwater camera, depending on, if you have an underwater camera, you can learn a lot by their behavior, right? And you'll see the fish come up and they'll stare at this thing spinning. And they won't take it.
Like a disco ball or something.
Exactly, right? So they're mesmerized by it, but it doesn't tell their brain, let's eat that. Yeah. This is like more of a let's investigate this, right? Yeah. And so when I take something along these lines where I can just drop that down, just with a inline like that, it's just going to drop the lure down. There's no line twist on something like this. And then, of course it's spinning right now. Yeah. But that lure is just going to go down in there, and then I could just kind of play with the action that I have at that time, and that's what I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. So that's a couple ideas. Now also with this rod here, with the way that I have some of that action, it gives me a little bit more. I'm barely moving my hand, but I'm getting quite a bit of a jig action, which I enjoy using for crappie in particular.
Yeah.
So also watching the way that a fish hits a line, oftentimes, I don't know if you've ever been fishing on a boat, for a walleye, but you'll kind of feel it hit, and hit. They kind of take the lure slow, right? And so if you're ice fishing, you might want to have something that's a little bit of a slower action, right, or a medium action for a walleye. That way they can take it and not feel the resistance. Then take it. You'll see a lot of people bobber fish for walleye, because then they can kind of take it, and I talk about how they'll sit there and they'll suck on it. And they'll just kind of hold it in their mouth and not do anything. And then after a little while, they'll finally turn it in their mouth, chew it, eat it, then you can set the hook. Yeah. Very, very, very patient. It's a little bit more skilled. Something like a northern might sit there and stare at it for a long time too. You got to trigger that response for them to rifle in there and take it. Panfish. Panfish, crappie, they're all sort of the same. They're kind of a community fish, definitely more on the schooling side of things, right? And so, like, what you'll see is you might have 3 or 4 different fish come in and watch this lure, and they play in this little polite society. We're all looking at the same thing. So then I'll try to jig up and above them and try to get maybe 2 to come up, and then jig up a little bit higher, then I get 1 on it. Well, if there's only one and only that is looking at that lure at that time, now I've got them just a little bit, and I can jig, hopefully set the hook, and then pull them up. And that's kind of my general method for that.
And there's the fish finder tools like Vexilar and Humminbird and stuff like that. And, is that something that you absolutely need to be able to ice fish, or why would a person want to get that? Right?
Yeah, you don't need to have headlights on a car, but it's a lot easier to see, isn't it? Right? So I think that personally, I think fishing without that is very hard. And there are times where you could sight fish. I don't use that when I'm fishing for trout. Often we drill a little bit different hole configuration, and you can sight fish. They like very clear water. You can see down 16, 18 feet. And you can jig them until you see them, and then pop them because you know them. And I almost have to watch them visually strike because they strike so fast. Whereas I was talking about how the panfish come up to hit, trout are very different. They hit when stuff falls. So you have to jig up and then let it fall, jig up and then let it fall. And then they'll strike on it. They're bug eaters. They eat stuff with wings and insects, so that slow fall triggers their feeding response, and it's very different. So understanding how the response is to things makes a big difference. And sometimes, the agitation. So how does a fish respond to a lure? Well, visually, right? Smell. They can sense vibration, and those are the things that you really have to target. And where do you get your advantages? You certainly for walleye use a lot of glow type lures. They walleye have these really incredible eyes that give them a predatory advantage over everything else. That's why they usually like to bite at night, except for in Lake of the Woods. And so giving something a little bit more of a visual presentation makes a difference, right? If there's a lot of snow on the ice, for other fish that really it makes it really dark, and so you have something that's attractive like that light, and the fish will come in on that, like a little glow stick or some other different tools, mechanisms out there. But a fish finder, it depends on who you are and how you like to do it. There's certainly people who will tell you that they don't need a fish finder, and they'll catch them just fine. Well, guess what? You probably can catch them just fine if you have a fish finder or like a Vexilar, Markham, Humminbird, whatever that is, some kind of locator. You're probably going to outfish them 10 to 1.
Yeah.
And I'm sure somebody can prove you wrong. But, I mean, you just can't. Seeing what you're doing and understanding, and that's a whole different episode. And, I can take you out on ice and show you how to do that.
Yeah.
But understanding what the response is.
Yeah.
I have fished with the Vexilar for so long, I can tell you by the way that something kind of comes into my indicator.
Yeah.
A walleye kind of has this little swoopy kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I just visualize them coming in and looking and then swooping away.
Yeah.
Whereas, crappies would be a big fat mark that sit about 6 feet higher than all the other stuff, and the panfish are usually down in the bottom.
Yeah.
So you start recognizing what the different species are, and then you have to prove yourself right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If you can catch them at all. Right. So that's what I do.
So if a person is gonna invest in that, I've heard it said before that the way to actually go out and find fish, because you can only fish in 1 or 2 holes at a time, but would be to go out and drill as many holes as you possibly can, and then just keep running. They call it like run and gun or something, where they just keep on dropping that fish finder into every hole until they find one, and then boom, go over there and fish that. I mean, it doesn't seem like it seems almost like trolling, but in the wintertime, in a way. But sure. I mean, what is that? I mean, generally speaking, if you're just going out for a day of fishing and you don't have a nice big ice fish house, or even like a pop-up or something like that.
Sure.
Is that the kind of strategy, or how would a person go about knowing exactly like how many holes to drill or where to even start with that?
It's strange, Zach. If you drilled a hole and I drilled a hole and we're both sitting here and our holes were about 2 feet apart, I've seen it where it doesn't matter who's in my hole; they're going to catch 8 fish to that one.
Yeah.
And it's just sometimes ice fishing's like that.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in 28 feet of water, where one was just constantly pulling up walleyes, and the other holes that were within 6 feet of that. 4 other holes couldn't catch a single one of them.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's just a stone down there or something, but somehow that triggered it. So there is some methodology to drilling several different holes to figure out where it is.
Yeah.
If I'm fishing crappie, let's just say, I look at it like a bowl, right? And so like if it's a 28-foot hole, right, and the average depth is maybe 14 feet.
A hole in the bottom of the sea. Yeah, okay,
yeah. Basin. Right.
Basin.
So if I'm looking at some kind of basin like that, I usually will start at the 26-foot, 24, 22, 20.
Working toward the edge.
I'll work my way out, right? They often aren't always sitting right in the center because of the volume. So I usually start at about 26, 24. And, who knows? They might be suspended 6 feet above at 26 feet. They might be. It's all about temperature and pressure for these guys. And that can vary from day to day. It can depend on what your weather systems are doing and your barometrics. There's the old theory that if you see smoke going straight up out of your chimney, go out and fish. It's no different than in springtime. If you hear a bunch of frogs croaking, go fishing for walleye.
Yeah.
There's certain indicators that we've muted of our senses that we no longer follow. So I think if you're a novice and you're wanting to learn how to ice fish, you don't want to do this if there's somebody in the hole. But if you go out and you see where somebody may have drilled about 15 to 30 holes around this area, here's where I would start. And I don't think this is cheating. I think it's just using good tracking skills.
Yeah.
Find the one that has the most sunflower seeds spit out from around it, because obviously someone spent some time there, right? There's a reason that they were there.
Cigarette butts or whatever.
Cigarette butts, unfortunately, dead minnows, that kind of stuff. Blood from probably them catching a fish or two. Use your tracking skills a little bit. I don't think that that's necessarily cheating.
No.
Especially when you're new, if you want to go out and blaze new areas, and I enjoy doing that.
Yeah.
Going out and finding, but more or less challenging. Let's face it. fishing is nothing more than a recognition of habitat and what the behavior of the species is doing in the habitat, right? So you learn certain habitats that match certain lures to match your species, and that's what gets you good. Think of it like a football coach. You have different plays in your playbook. You have your different ones.
Situations.
Yeah, I've got a lot of confidence in about 12 different plays for my crappie playbook. I have 2 really significant walleye ones. One of them is go to Red Lake, right? Right? And so like panfish, I mean, I kind of know where my panfish holes are, stuff, that kind of thing. So, I've kind of learned those things over time.
Trial and error.
A little bit of trial and error, fishing with different people, right? Your philosophy is different than mine. Some people have the advantage of growing up here and their parents grew up here and maybe their father taught them or their mother taught them how to ice fish, or maybe they went to high school here and did nothing but go fishing after school. I didn't grow up around here, so I had to learn it from different directions. But yeah. And then matching your equipment to fit what it was. We're talking about different lines. You could use braid, you can use mono, you can use fluorocarbon. Anymore, I kind of use braided line, which is, fish can see braided line, so it's not a great use. But there's no, there's no memory in braided line, so it doesn't coil up. The other thing is it's good for usually 10 years. And then the last thing on braided line is that it doesn't stretch, right? So if I set the hook, I can get it. And so what I typically do, it's kind of almost a fly fishing technique. I will tie on a piece of fluorocarbon, which is relatively expensive line, which gives you the benefit of mono being clear, put on about a 6-foot leader, and then just tie that on and have it all in line so it just meshes. And so I have a really nice balance of having a backer plus the invisible line that has the strength that I want. And if things go well, I'm going to fish the lightest, smallest equipment I possibly can. I've caught 10-pound northern on a tungsten jig like that. You wouldn't even think that it would work, but it does.
Oh yeah, I mean, if it gets into something, that'll take your arm. I mean,
I would never fish with something like that in the summertime.
No,
I fish with everything much bigger, but in the winter time, I know I can catch about anything with something like that.
So let's say then that a person has kind of got to that level of ice fishing where they feel comfortable with a few plays from their playbook and everything like that.
Sure.
And now they're kind of looking to get to the next level, which is comfort and staying power. And I'm talking about getting the fish house, right?
Sure.
So what kind of...
Our adaptability to the environment.
Yes. Right? Yeah. Because there's only so much that a person can take of... Even if they're sitting in a pop-up or, out in the elements and everything like that,
sure.
The ability, and especially at night,
Sure.
So what are some of the considerations that a person should have when they're considering buying their first fish house?
Well, fish house or tent or anything like that, I would say
or maybe you start with a tent and then get to the next level.
Yeah. I mean, I think the order of purchase besides some lures, and those are really nominal purchases, although, I mean, I have more lures money tied up than I would care to admit. Having a good rod and reel, I definitely, something like what I first showed you, Parker's rod and reel over there.
Something very simple, right?
Why not start with something like that? It's going to do the trick.
Yeah.
Right? And then I might have been a little more technical and nerded out on some of my other stuff, but, I've kind of graduated into those things as I've learned more about what I want to do. I don't think you can underestimate a good pair of waterproof insulated boots. I think once your feet are cold, the trip is done. And that's hunting, that's anything else.
I was going to say that's exactly the way it is for hunting.
Right. And so, look, I would say, I would buy, if you're trying to figure out how do I budget and work my way into this, start with the rod and reel, right? Because you're not catching anything without it. You may want to consider a spud bar, maybe even a hand drill. Find a friend, really, that has a lot of this equipment. Then you can go out with them. Having that good pair of boots is paramount. Beyond that, there's all kinds of different fish shelters that are out there.
Yep.
My very first fish house I bought was a wheelhouse that I happened to buy for $500. Now, this is 14 years ago, and it served me very, 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 very well. Well, but there's also things to consider. Do you have a truck? Do you not have a truck? Maybe that's not a great idea. And so you could do a lot. I have, as you know, been in the fish house business for a long time.
Yeah.
And sold a lot of wheelhouses and of multiple different brands. I've been an owner of a fish house company. Today, I fish out of a tent. I like it. I like the mobility. I have a Ranger, so I can throw everything in the back. I can zip out and go. I like to adventure when I go ice fishing.
Yeah.
I would not. Now, if I went to Red Lake, I would like to go with somebody who has a fish house, because we're probably going to stay there all night.
Sure.
And that's more comfortable than a little pop-up tent.
Yeah.
If you want to find me the happiest ice fishing, it's going to be on a 50-degree day in March that I'm crappie fishing.
Yeah.
You can't beat that. Give me a bucket. I am happy. So fishing rod, of course, a little bit of tackle, boots, then a Vexilar, or whatever, insert whatever fish finder you want.
Yeah.
And then probably the shelter would be next, or an auger, something like that. So it wouldn't take long to spend your money.
Yeah.
You're probably getting it for about $1,500 at this point.
The electric auger, the ones with the batteries, or
if you have like a Milwaukee or battery operated drill, like a DeWalt, there's all kinds of different auger options now that you can put in.
Oh yeah, I've seen that before. That you just
I used to have a propane ice auger, and it was about 54 pounds, I think it was, and that's before you have all the slush and snow on it, and yanking that thing up. But I liked the propane because it didn't gas out my fish house.
Yeah.
Well, once the electric one, I was a little hesitant on getting that at first. Once I got it, I'm never going back to a big heavy auger again.
Yeah.
It's just so nice to be able to just drop that in there, grab it, drill.
Just electric drill with a bit on it that's an auger.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's it.
How powerful of a drill do you need? I mean, what's
a 20 volt? Like a 20 volt hammer drill. I do a hammer drill, so it's got a little bit of clutching if it gets bound up. A little bit tougher. You wouldn't want to use an impact. You just sit there and ratchet, and it would never go anywhere.
Yeah, right.
But a hammer drill situation. But by the time you buy a hammer drill and a battery and the chargers and an auger, you're the same money as, say, any old Strike Master that's out there. An Ion. So I mean, your entry point. I would say if you've got the drill, go that way. If you want to go a different direction, knock yourself out. I like to be able to be redundant with my purposes. So, and I had it. You know what I mean? So that made a little bit of a difference. But I wouldn't go back. Man, it's so lightweight, easy to use, and it's good.
And you could just take that auger right off too, and it's probably a lot more portable than carrying around a big, heavy.
Oh, big time.
Yeah,
big time. And if I need to go walk a bunch of different places, I mean, no big deal. It's super simple. So simple's good.
I mean, one of the things too about even with a tent is that you got to figure out, well, where am I going to put this?
Right. Yep.
And so do you set that up more as the place where you're going to sit during the day, or do you look at it more as like, this is a home base and I'm just going to drill holes all around here and then kind of figure out what I'm going to be doing?
Some of that has to do with the lake.
Yeah.
Like the lake that I go out on in particular, I mean, I'm not on Man Trap near as much as I used to be. If I'm going up to Man Trap, we may or may not set up a tent. It depends on how long we're out there.
Yeah.
Currently, right now, the lake that I go out and I go ice fishing for crappie or panfish, whatever comes up the hole. Yeah. Typically, always crappie. There's an old, I told you about the smoke coming up. I talked about the frogs. There's another little one too. If you hold your hand up on the horizon, the old Boundary Waters thing would say you hold up your hand up against the horizon, for every finger is 15 more minutes is sunset.
Okay.
Right? So they say 2 fingers, the sun is 2 fingers above the tree line, crappies will start to bite. Okay, so basically it's half hour before sunset.
Yeah.
Oh, how about that? Doesn't that match up with deer hunting? Right, so a half hour before sunset to about a half hour after sunset. Yeah. You got about an hour window. So the lake I'm on, it behaves that way, right? And so it's on like Donkey Kong, for boom, 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 just crappies. You wouldn't even think the lake would have a crappie in it up until that point, and then you just pound the crappies, and then all of a sudden it just turns off like a switch. So for me, I know I'm going to drill about 6 different holes. We'll say the 28-foot basin, it's going to be 26, 22, 18, 14, just probably not that exaggerated, but something along those lines. And then where I start marking fish, I'm going to set up my tent there and I'm going to call it a night, because I'm not going to hole hop all night long. Yeah. I got to get on fish because it's a limited window.
Yeah. Isn't that called like being crepuscular, basically?
You're outside of my dictionary.
Well, I actually think that refers to an animal, because like you've got diurnal, nocturnal, and then you've got crepuscular, which I think are the ones that are active at dawn and dusk.
Oh, yeah. I think, well, isn't that kind of nature's dinner bell anyway?
I think so.
You know, I mean, I think you're going to see, I mean, if you're driving, dusk is a good time to hit a deer.
Sure.
Right? You know,
absolutely it is.
You're going to see grouse. You're going to see the turkeys in the ditches. I mean, they're filling up their crop. You're going to see all kinds of mobility as things are kind of getting that last meal before they wind up.
People driving home from work, people going to the grocery store. Yep. It all kind of happens around that time.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So I think we're all of that nature just a little bit. Yeah. Unfortunately, because of that, sometimes that's compromising when you want to ice fish, because maybe that's when your family wants to have dinner. It's like, hey, just give me a half hour.
But you got to have your priorities, right? I mean, you know, fishing has got to take precedence.
Yeah, right, exactly. Or at least proper planning. Yeah. Right, yeah. So I mean, you figure those things out as you negotiate your own relationships and how those things work out. But yeah, I mean, there is something to that. You know. So but for me in that instance, that's why I would use the tent. I would use the tent because also what happens when the sun goes down, it cools off pretty quick. Oh yeah. Right? And so, and if it's windy, I may not want to drill a whole bunch of holes. I might just go and try to jig stuff in and suffer and see what happens. Yeah. At least I'm out fishing. Yeah. Right? And since I favor ice fishing far more than I favor summer fishing, I will invest the time to do that. But I like to get out there quick, like to get out there, and I like to catch my fish, and then I like to be home. If I can be round trip out fishing and back within an hour and a half and come home with 2 or 3 12-inch crappie or 2, something like that. I mean, I throw dinner back for 2 or dinner for 2 or 3. I mean, that's a good night, and it's a treat for everybody.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the things that I think is really good about ice fishing, is that it's a way to be active in the winter months. Now there aren't that many activities that you can really get into. I mean, like I'm excluding stuff like motorsports and things like that. I'm just saying that, like, to actually go out and have to like actually do some exercise movement and everything like that. I mean, not that I don't want to say that snowmobiling doesn't involve exercise, because a lot of times it does. But,
well, there's an entry point that's out of reach for a lot of people.
But yeah, and sure, you need a snowmobile. So, it's people, I think, can get down in what do they call that, in the seasonal affected disorder and all that stuff in the wintertime and everything. And I think fishing is a way to kind of get around that, because you get that sense of I'm doing something that's productive. I might maybe get a meal out of it. I can get some success. I get some fresh air. Sure. I haven't been defeated by the cold weather, and it's invigorating in a way, to be out there even in the cold and all that stuff. So I think it's a great hobby.
And there's story value.
Sure.
I mean, if you went out there for 2 hours and you didn't catch a single fish, if you walked into work the next day and somebody said, "Hey, what'd you do last night?" "Oh, I went out fishing." "Oh, man, I should have done that." Perhaps. Yeah. And it really doesn't matter, did you catch fish or not? Right. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, I mean, you might say, "Hey, did you catch anything?" "No, I didn't catch anything." "Hey, man, at least you're out." Doesn't matter. And we know that. We reassure people of that in that sense,
Another fun thing that I've done before with fishing is go out there and like watch the football game in the tent while I'm fishing.
Certainly you can do that. Yeah,
little things you can do like that. But
I play around with different things as well. When I'm out there, I was gonna mention, there's different methods too. If I'm sitting in a hole and I set up my tent, I might use a lure similar to this. This is called a time bomb. Okay. But I might use a lure similar to this that has a little bit of a rattle. So this bead hops up and down. And I'll pop that up and down inside the water. However, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm catching a lot of fish on it. I'll see on my fish finder, fish start to come in. So I'll grab that, and I call that nature's dinner bell to my kids. So I'm going to bring out nature's dinner bell, and I'll zip, 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 zip. And there's other different lures that I have that I use to these are kind of my calling lures. Okay. And so I'll call in stuff. I have this one there's a few of them.
I never heard of that before. Summoning fish.
We haven't fished together. I'll show you more stuff. But it's just worked for me, and a lot of times it's, when I first started fishing, I was in a fish house. So once you have that fish house set and you drilled your holes, there's a reluctance to moving, right? So like this guy here, I think they called it a whistler at one time, but it's like a little propeller. So it grabs the water and it races up and down, and it just creates a whole bunch of vibration. So
they're attracted to that movement or vibration.
They're curious, yeah. And so then they'll come in on it, and then I'll drop something that I know that they typically like a small little jig. When you're ice fishing, it's a very vertical movement, right?
Yeah.
And so you lose all your x-axis. It's all basically y. These things right here are jigging wraps. And when you pull these up, then they sail down and go different directions. And so you can get a little bit more of a horizontal axis as well with these. Now, these I have a tendency to be able to call in bigger fish with, like Northern and other things. And they'll hit this. You know, it's got hooks on both the front and the back, and it's also got a treble in the center. And so there's different ways that I use these different calling lures. They're heavy, they get down quick. And so I'll use those if things are going well. These guys right here, these spoons, I pretty much use these for trout. They flutter.
What's the difference between a spoon and a jig?
A spoon and a jig? A spoon typically has, well, I would consider, I don't know if I have a true hardcore. This seems to be a little bit more of a spoon, you know, more of a spoon type blade, if you will. To me, that's more of a spoon. People might be able to argue that. You know, a jig is probably more of an adjective of what it is. But, you know, then we have buckshot and other things like that has like little BBs on the inside.
Yeah, so I was going to say, do you ever put any shot on your line or anything like that? Or is it the tungsten pretty much take care of that?
So, yeah, with the tungsten jigs, I usually have that tipped with a waxworm or maybe a crappie minnow. So now I'm appealing to their olfactory sense.
Sure.
You know, so you kind of have that. The little jigs that I often use glow. So I'm using a visual presentation. I'm also using a little bit of smell. Yeah. And then if I pull out one of those nature dinner bells, then, you know, I've got vibration. So there's a couple different ways to pull it in. Since I get to use two holes, and I typically don't watch flags when I'm by myself. Yeah. I might zip over here in this hole and then jig in this hole here. Okay. So I kind of use a two-handed approach. You know, from that standpoint. Sometimes I'll just dead stick, which is a whole different method, you know, and just
let it sit there.
Just let them sit there. Sometimes what we do, they say in sales, Zach, that deals aren't lost by what you say, it's about, or aren't lost of what wasn't said, it's about what you've said, right? So if you speak too much, you're like, yeah, I'm done, I'm out of here, right? And sometimes you can just say nothing at all, and people like that better. Which is kind of anti-podcast.
Well, right? Yeah, but I mean, it goes that way with fish too. Like, you don't know. Like, some of them want you to do something, some of them don't want you to do anything.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Right. Well, and I'm going to tell you a little story. So I was out there. I used to do some TV shows and other things like that with the promotions that we used to do. And I was out on Big Stone Lake, which is down in the border between Minnesota and South Dakota. And I'm out there and I'm meeting this guide who's the host of this TV show. I bring over our fish house and we're going to go out and we're going to go fishing for perch, which is probably not my favorite species to go fish. By the way, Wisconsin, all about the panfish. Minnesota, all about the walleye. North Dakota, all about the perch, right? And so it depends on where you want. And
the giant perch that they have there.
Yeah, right? When I was out in Maine, it's all about salmon, and it's all about cusk, which we call eel pout, which they're all known as burbot. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so it's cusk and togues are lake trout, but lake trout, they're a trash fish. Yeah. Because they get involved with their salmon. You know, it's very, very different. It's been fun to experience those things. So anyway, I get over into this bait shop where we're supposed to meet, and we're in there, and this older guy is kind of behind the counter, and I pull up, and I'm like, hey, have you seen so-and-so yet? No, he's not here. I'm like, okay. I said, well, what's biting? He goes, perch. Isn't that why you're here? I'm like, yeah, of course. So you're one of these guys, right? Yeah. And I said, well, what are they biting on there? He goes, a gold tungsten jig and Euro larva. I said, oh, I don't normally fish with Euro larvae. You know, they're kind of like little tiny maggots that squish all over the place when you poke them. And I said, any particular kind? He goes, do a gold jig head, red, white, red, white. And I said, okay. So not like red, white, red. He said, red, white, red, white. And I said, not, and I tried him on one more time. Not white, red, white, red. And he walked off. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm out there and I'm going to go fishing for perch, and I figure all the perch I catch, I've caught accidentally when I'm fishing for panfish.
Yeah,
so
they're kind of annoying because they're like around here, they're all real small.
Yeah, right, exactly. Mm-hmm. They're just kind of a nuisance. You
Yeah.
think that you've been fishing something for a while, you pull it up, and you're like, God, dang,
another perch.
Right, yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. But out there, that's big sport.
Yeah.
And so, then they're promising 9 to 12-inch perch.
Yeah.
So we go out, and he finally shows up, as he does, and we go out, we start fishing, and I drop kind of what I normally fish for a crappie, and occasionally I get hit. He's trying out whatever he's promoted by, right? And so, and next thing you know, I said, this crazy guy over at the bait shop told me red, white, and he said a gold tungsten jig, red, white, red, white. He goes, what do you think about that whole color thing? Yeah. I said, you know what? Somebody told me a long time ago. He goes, sometimes they want a hamburger, sometimes they want a cheeseburger.
Yeah.
And it's really a good idea, to see what color they want. And I've seen it before where they just won't take a pink lure, but they'll take an orange. I think anybody who knows Lake of the Woods knows it's a red and gold lake. I have a whole Lake of the Woods box somewhere. I don't know if I have it right here.
Yeah.
But out there, I said, so I don't know. Maybe there's something to it. He goes, well, did you get some? I said, well, yeah, I've always got to buy 3 ice fishing lures.
Yeah.
And so I bought these gold little tungsten jigs just like this. This is probably the one right here. Yeah, because it still has line on it because I didn't take better care of it. Okay. But anyway, that tungsten jig, I put on a red larva, white larva, red larva, white larva, which is pretty packed on that hook.
Yeah,
they're tiny. I dropped it down, and I swear to God, boom, caught a perch. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And Mike, the guy I'm with, he's like, are you serious? I said, dude, I just did what he said.
Yeah.
So I drop it back down, boom, another fish. Boom, another fish. Boom, another fish. I said, now what I didn't tell you, Mike, because I was kind of jacked with the guy. Do you know him very well? No, I don't know him very well. Well, that's good, because I was kind of picking at him a little bit. And I said, what about white, red, white, red? And he goes, well, have you tried it? I said, no, I'm going to. And they wouldn't touch it. The fish wouldn't touch white, red, white, red. And had I not done it myself, and it was on TV, right? And we talked about this story on TV.
So that interaction with the guys on TV,
Yeah, it was all recorded. Yeah. Well, except for the guy in the bait store that told me that. And so then I went red, white, white, red. Caught a couple.
Yeah.
And then I went back to red, white, red, white on a gold jig. Bam, bam, bam. And I outfished Mike, who's his professional guide, 8 fish to 1 all day long. I'm up to 60, 70 fish, and he's catching like bizarre fish.
He refused to adopt your method.
And finally, he's like, "Give me one of those." And so I gave him one of the gold jigs, and so he ties it on and he puts it down. And and I tried other jigs. I tried like the gold sparkle. I tried an orange one. I tried a red one, a black one, other ones. They say when the fish are taking anything, that's when you try the other lures to see if it's that or if it's what it is, and you can perfect your technique.
Yeah.
And maybe you can learn what the different ones are. And they wouldn't take anything else but a gold jig with a red, white, red, white. And it was crazy. And when he switched over to that, he caught as many fish as I did.
That is crazy.
It was
That
nuts.
it's nuts. That specific and that...
Who figured it out?
Well, yeah, I was
and
just
why
thinking
did they
that.
tell
It was
anybody?
like, so they told the guy at the bait shop knew that.
Yeah.
But... I mean, I wonder if that's just because a lot of people had reported doing that, or if he had gone out there and done that himself. And I was because
he maybe did. I don't know.
Usually, the people at the bait shop will usually give you good advice because they want you to come back and keep going and shopping at their bait shop. Generally speaking,
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I did that.
Yeah. So I mean, and there's also this sort of culture when it comes to ice fishing or fishing in general that people don't really necessarily say what their spots are and everything like that. But if a person was going to try to do a little bit on their own or didn't know people or didn't know the area, a bait shop might be a good place to get a little bit of local advice.
I think so. If you provide them the direction that you're heading in the lake that you want, they'll probably give you advice of where to locate something on that lake if they're worth anything.
Yeah.
I heard a long time ago that a Minnesotan will tell you anything that you want to know.
Yeah.
As long as you don't ask them where to hunt, fish, or where they live.
Yeah.
I think there's some truth to that. So, I think that if you said, okay, I'm going to go fish this, I would say, okay, you know what? I've never fished this lake before.
Yeah.
Let's just say that we're picking on, like, I don't know, Turtle Lake up in Bemidji. And I could probably look at a topographical map and say, this is what what I would target and try. Or drive out to the spot. If you see tire tracks or you see a bunch of sunflower seeds or cigarette butts or what have you, start fishing. You know what I mean? But, I mean, I share spots when I know that it's a pretty well-known spot.
Yeah.
There are certain lakes that I've been to with people that it's kind of a privilege of seeing and knowing where they're at. And because they said that that's their spot, I wouldn't tell people.
Sure. Right.
Because those invitations stop. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that I know more than anybody else, but I did work in a bait store for a long time. I was in the ice fishing community for, I think, 14 years. And as humble as I want to be, I know quite a bit about what's going on out there.
Yeah.
And I've been asked to guide before. I refuse to guide. I will take somebody out and volunteer, but I won't charge. If they want to tip me at the end, that's fine. I've done that before. But, I don't want to compromise a good time based on some kind of exchange of money. Yeah. If we go out and decide that you're somebody that I want to ice fish with, well, let's go.
Yeah.
You know what? You don't need to pay me anything for that. Okay, sure. If we burn a bunch of propane, we burn a bunch of this, that, whatever, fine. We can figure something out. Buy lunch. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
So we'll take a look.
It's an enjoyable thing to do with
I think so.
else.
It's a social event, and hopefully we find success.
Yeah. So, weather-wise, what kind of weather are we looking for as being ideal for the formation of the kind of ice that you want to have, and why does some weather adversely impact our ability to ice fish in this area?
Well, I personally think that if the weather could come properly for the winter time, we would get a good 12 inches of solid ice and then snow.
So you want the ice first, then snow.
I want a base of 12 inches of ice, and then we can bring on some snow. 18 inches is better, but it usually doesn't work that way.
Yeah, because usually we get snow before we get
We can get snow before ice. Let it all melt.
Yeah.
But, snow insulates the ice. And so probably what happened on LaSalle is that I went out there, and there was a base, and then it snowed, and then it rained, and then it formed a second layer of ice.
Yeah, because that can be miserable, right? When you're walking through the slush, basically.
It scared the heck out of me. Yeah. Well, there is that. I've walked through a lot of slush before. I've been out on Itasca before on my four-wheeler. I was on tracks. Myself and another guy were going out there before we pulled the fish house out just to see if we could get through, and we high-centered. It broke through on the tracks and high-centered. So now you're in the middle of a lake, and you have a tracked machine, which you can't push, right?
No.
High-centered, and you're on a base, so it's ice, water, slush, ice, and then we're sitting on top of that with it all.
So how did you get it out?
You have to lay down in the water and dig the snow out with your feet. Unless you're smart enough to. We even went to shore and broke off branches to try to build the surface up, but it just shot it right across the ice. It was horrible. Yeah. It was absolutely horrible. It was a terrible thing. It is something that when we see each other, we both know that we survived it. There's a little bit of a high five and a bonding. Thank you, Tim Schmid, for all your help that day. Yeah. It was a great. I mean, we look back and laugh favorably, but it was a bit of panic at the moment. You just have to be resourceful and think. That's not ideal when you get snow or rain on top of ice. Rain with that standing water will find a hole in that ice, and then it will erode out that ice as it continues to run through. Remember, the kinetic water doesn't freeze,
right?
And it often will melt on everything else around it. Kinetic being snow or current. I'm sorry, not snow, but wind or current.
So what we'd like to see is temperatures drop precipitously, or at some point, maybe after deer hunting season.
Sure. Or usually the second weekend of deer hunting is usually when you see the backwater start to freeze up.
Okay.
Typically, I see that almost every year. Yeah.
And then just have it remain that way for a few weeks until we get that base of ice, and then let it snow.
Yeah, if we can get 12 inches before Thanksgiving, get a little snow for Thanksgiving, there's nothing wrong with that, and then let it continue to accumulate. For a lot of people, 12 inches of ice is all clear. Some people it's 14, sometimes it's 16.
To drive on.
Sometimes even to walk on. For myself, I prefer to be out on 12 inches of ice, even if I'm walking or if I'm in a side-by-side or a four-wheeler or something like that, I'm a lot more comfortable.
Sure.
Well, a lot of times I'm out by myself too,
Yeah.
right? So that has a lot to do with it.
Extra safety.
Yeah. Now I'm usually at a successful place too, so I'm not completely alone. But you know what I mean. And if I am going to go out and adventure, I should probably say this: if I am going to go out and adventure and go onto a lake that I've never been on, I'm usually bringing an adventure buddy with me.
Yeah.
And we're going to go figure that out. Why? Because they have a sense of adventure as well.
Yeah.
And two, because sometimes it's nice to come back home.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. What's the earliest you've been out on the calendar and the latest?
The earliest I've been out on the calendar was way beyond my wife's comfort zone. Her mindset is not before Christmas. I know I've been out in November. My kids were in basketball, you know what I mean? And still are. And so, that's when basketball season's kind of ramping up, so it doesn't really conveniently work out for me to be that aggressive guy. I usually take that week off between Christmas and New Year's, historically.
Oh, great time to fish.
And, being in the ice fishing business too, Zach, every single weekend I was at ice fishing shows. So, I wasn't really pushing the early ice adventure. I know that years ago when I had one of my wheelhouses, I took it out on... I want to say it was the middle of November. I want to say I had it out like November 20th. And I think I had it I was 2 weeks shy of having it on the ice for 6 months straight. Going 2012 to 2013.
Wow.
The frozen opener.
Yeah.
I had my fish house out there.
Frozen opener, yeah.
You remember the frozen opener?
No,
Were you up here for that?
No,
there's still ice on the lakes when the governor came up. When we had the GFO, the governor's fishing opener here in Park Rapids.
There was still ice?
In 2013. Yeah, they called it the frozen opener. Yeah. So that was an exciting time.
When does the fishing season actually end? Isn't it like...
Depends on the species.
Okay.
That's not a reason.
You can fish for crappies and stuff like that all year round, right?
Sunfish, eel pout, that kind of stuff.
But walleye season, northerns, that ends in February or something?
Third weekend of February,
okay.
I think it's third weekend of February.
So
it might vary every year.
You've been out in a fish house as late as May. In other words, is what you're saying?
No, March.
March.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, March.
Yeah.
I don't think I don't think I've ever been on the ice in May.
Yeah.
Not of any significance. I might have stood on the shoreline just to say I did it. And
yeah.
Watch my wife squirm. Or something like that. But I've never been out ice fishing that late. No, probably mid-March would be about the latest I've been out on ice.
Like kind of realistically, we're talking about December, January, and February as being your prime months, and
I would say March.
A good part
as much
of March too,
so basketball stops in March, right? So for at that point there, I probably have as much time clocked in March as any other month out there. Yeah,
and it's kind of you can get a sunny day here and there that's nice to sit out on the bucket and all that.
Right, exactly. And so many of my years have been spent at ice fishing shows on those weekends. I got stuff to take care of during my work week too that I really didn't have any time for myself until but the last we did a show in Duluth and it was usually around the 17th or 18th of December. Well, the following weekend's Christmas.
Yeah.
Right? And so my time is my family's at that point. And then, next thing you know, it's New Year's.
Yeah.
And then, so it is January, February. You know what I mean? And often it's March. So even my December, I think the earliest I've been on red is maybe December 7th, something like that. Boy, we caught a ton of fish. We filmed a TV show on that one too. And we're pulling up 2 and 3 walleye at a time.
Wow.
Like literally at a time. We caught it. Again, that's all on film. It sounds like a fish story, but I can tell you so many fun fish stories about the fish I didn't catch.
Yeah.
But I've got some really awesome stories about the times that we did catch. But that's not why we're here. So
when you catch let's say you got into some crappies and stuff, and you took some home, what's your favorite way to prepare it if you're going to cook it up?
I used to do a lot of different shore lunch type things and different Mr. Walleye kind of, there's a whole bunch of different crunchy ways to fry it
and all that. Yeah.
Over time, it doesn't matter. And I like to eat smallmouth. There might be some bass fishermen that cringe that. When I'm in the boundary waters, it seems like a common meal. But I don't care if it's northern walleye, crappie, panfish, smallies, or even trout for that matter. Trout's a little different. I prepare that differently. But on all those whitefish, I fillet them, remove the skin, of course, and then I usually put about a tablespoon of butter down in the cast iron skillet, put a little salt and pepper, squeeze a lemon on it. When it's halfway through, flip it over, and pull it right off that way.
And that's it.
Nothing complicated, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
Oftentimes when you cook something, especially on game, it has more to do with how you cook it, not what you cook it with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you can overcook venison like that. Same thing with chicken. If it's tough and rubbery, you're cooking it too long.
Yeah.
Right? But if you get the flavor and everything else.
But it's just, you got to get it just right.
You do have to get it just right. And fish is a little forgiving, right? It turns white, it's done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, but yeah, no, I was with some guys. We went up to Red Lake, and we stayed in a little VRBO, and it's like, God, this is the best fish I ever had. And I said, what's your secret? And he started laughing at me. It was just butter, salt, and pepper. I'm like, why do I complicate all this stuff?
Yeah.
And I like that. My wife prefers that. My kids prefer that.
It's healthier too than breading it and deep frying.
There is a healthy thing,
right?
yeah. But even if it wasn't healthy, I would still prefer that method for sure, big time. Yeah, so that's it. Maybe that's boring. I don't know. I mean,
I think the simplest things are usually the best when it comes to food, right?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, there's some things that have to that do require some additional preparation steps and things when you get into real fancy high cuisine or whatever, but for the most part I think the most basic foods for everyday consumption are the best.
Sure. Yeah. And if you're in that survival situation or going up to the boundary waters, less to carry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't need much. Yeah, unless butter, I suppose. But
I suppose, I guess. Yeah.
Well, Mark, do you have anything else you want to add about fishing as a hobby or sport, or any last pieces of wisdom here to encourage people to get out there and try this? We got winter coming up soon.
I would say a couple of things. For one, I would say that if you see somebody in a fish house, the rule is that you have to be 10 feet away from their fish house.
Okay.
I would really strongly urge anybody and everybody that give people space out on the ice.
Yeah.
If you come by somebody and you talk to them and you casually have a conversation, that doesn't mean that they want to be around you. Read them. And if they're like, hey, come on over, we got some holes drilled, make a new friend.
Sure.
Because there's probably 2 of those for every one grumpy old man.
Yeah.
But the grumpy old men are grumpy old men, and they make life interesting, and so, respect people. It's all public land or public water in that case. But, you want to be respectful what that is. Listen to what other people are doing. I think that there's a lot to be learned if you just listen. And I think taking the opportunity to go out with somebody, if you find somebody, say maybe even like me, who enjoys the sport, who loves the sport, who, if you work with their time schedule, be happy to take you along. Why not take advantage of that experience?
Absolutely.
There's nothing wrong with fishing with somebody 2 or 3 times and then you go learn your own thing. But you got to start to learn the craft somewhere.
Yep.
Whether it was fly fishing or bass fishing or ice fishing or even hunting.
Yeah.
There's stuff that you can save yourself years of trouble with by just learning a few basic things. And
absolutely.
It's worth it. It's so worth it. And, there's a lot of I have found that the ice fishing community is extremely kind. And since it is kind of a rapidly evolving sport, I think that there's a lot of people who are happy to learn what you're doing and what you're sharing, and they're willing to share what they're doing. But if they're not, give them a lot of space because you don't know what they're dealing with at home. Maybe they just need to be out by themselves.
Be left alone. Yeah.
Yeah. So and be safe. So I think that would be one thing. The second thing is we didn't really talk about bait tackle, but talk to your bait stores.
Yeah.
Talk to your bait stores. They. Or your tackle stores.
Well, that example that you gave of red white was a good,
It was. Guy was doing me a favor, and I took him poorly, and I he was right, right. And so even if they're crazy, maybe they know something. I would not do this. I would not go into a fishing store and say, where should I fish? What should I use? What should I buy? What should I go do that?
Right.
Have some formulation of a plan. I'm going out on fish hook today.
Right.
This is what my current equipment is, and I'd like to catch these fish. If I went here, am I doing the right thing?
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you travel. If you make an attempt to speak their language, people cut you a lot of grace.
They do.
You know?
Yeah, even in France.
Even in France,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, hey, you know, give it a whirl, give it a try. I think that, you know, I think the last point I'd like to make is that respect the area that you're in as well. As much as the sunflower seed thing is, I kind of joke about it, stop doing that.
Yeah.
Don't make a mess. Don't be a pig out there on the ice. Pick up your cigarette butts. Don't leave your beer cans. Don't leave this, that, whatever. I don't want to. Now, okay, you might get a Boy Scout like myself that's gonna pick that stuff up.
Yeah,
but don't burden me with that. Pick up your own mess. Take care of it. Get the socks up off the steps and carry them upstairs. Yeah, like I told you the first place. Right? But just you know what? We have one world that we all have to share. And we have one environment, and this is a very regional thing. And if we treat people with respect, and we treat the environment that we also respect, we're not being a pig when we're taking all kinds of fish. Just take what you're going to use, leave the rest. It's your fishing license. You can do what you want, but you don't need to be a pig when you're out there.
Right. Yeah. Amen. All right. Well, Mark, I think this has been very informative, and hopefully people can learn something from you when they go out and try ice fishing this winter. So
let's hope. About 9 more weeks.
Yeah, and it's also been great to have you as the first repeat guest. That's going to go down in the history books.
That's sweet. Well, it's good that we're making history and doing all the right things. So it's exciting. Well, let's get out on ice this winter, and let's.
I was waiting for you to ask. Yes,
of course.
Okay,
yeah, definitely.
All right,
let's do it.
All right. I'm looking forward to it then.
Yeah, me too.
All right, Mark Harmon. Thanks again,
Zach. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.